Why a mere 40,000 voters are being watched by the world. It's election day in Greenland, the sparsely populated Arctic island that U.S. President Trump says he'll get one way or another. Officially a Danish territory, many Greenlanders have been pushing for independence. But now, with a major global power eyeing its acquisition, is this a good time to go it alone? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Greenland's election. All except one party contesting Greenland's election favor independence from Denmark. How to get there is where they differ. For their tiny population of just 57,000, the choice they make is crucial, as it could leave the country vulnerable to the aspirations of the United States. President Trump says acquiring Greenland is a question of national and international security. And though he hasn't said how, he's clear the U.S. will have the territory. 85% of Greenlanders say they do not want to be American. But are they really prepared to protect their mineral wealth and strategic location from a superpower? Here's a look.
It's a vast, resource-rich island with a population the size of a small town, and it's facing an uncertain future. As Greenland heads into a pivotal election, the eyes of the world are watching. Could this vote lead to full independence, or will it remain under the influence of global powers? Greenland has long enjoyed a degree of self-rule, but it remains an autonomous country within the Kingdom of Denmark, and Copenhagen still governs foreign policy and defense. US President Donald Trump has repeatedly made headlines by suggesting the US should take control of Greenland. His statements have sent shockwaves through the island and beyond.
We strongly support your right to determine your own future. And if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
But Greenland's leaders are pushing back. Prime Minister Mute Egede is clear about the island's intentions, that Greenland will decide its own future, and it will not be dictated to by foreign powers.
We are Greenlanders. We don't want to be Americans. We don't want to be Danish either. Greenland's future will be decided by Greenland.
While many islanders share the vision of independence, the path is complicated. Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has made it clear that Greenland is an integral part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and it's not for sale.
I think we have been very clear from the Kingdom of Denmark, with great support from the European partners and the European Union, that everybody has to respect the sovereignty of all national states in the world, and that Greenland is today a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It's a part of our territory, and it's not for sale.
For Greenlanders, the debate over their future isn't just political, it's personal. Many feel a deep connection to their identity and their land.
I think it is Trump's statements he wants to take over Greenland and the control. This was also something he was stating in the first period he was as a president, but then everyone saw it as a joke. It was not taken seriously. But now he has been repeatingly this kind of statement several times. So it seems that it is a little more certain or kind of threatening right now.
This election will determine whether the island's future will be written by Greenlanders themselves, or whether it will become a piece in a global power game.
So does U.S. interest give Greenland leverage over Denmark in its quest for independence, or open the door to something potentially more oppressive? And how can we know? Well, joining me now to try to answer that and more are from Copenhagen, geopolitical expert Bo Memhave, from Washington, Republican strategist Amy Koch, and from London, honorary research fellow at UCL's Institute of the Americas, Tom Packer. Now, we did reach out to a list of guests from Greenland, but unfortunately no one was able to join us due to the election today. So let's start, if we can, then in Denmark. And Bo Memhave, you have actually kind of downplayed that this is a vote about independence, but a number of Greenlanders, including some who are actually running for office, they see it as that. Still, you've said it's really not the time to be talking about it. How so?
I think it's important here to understand that independence is one thing. It's already progressing. It's a thing that goes on. When we talk about independence, it is a pace that needs to be done in a certain way. It's already started, and there's a lot of things going on already. And I think in Denmark, the most Danes are really excited about that. They in Greenland will have more independence. They will have more rights to say and do things themselves, but they also need to be ready for doing it. It's not just pull a plug and then go do something else. So
because
I think
what happens,
really,
do you think then, if you think they push too fast?
I think you need to have some numbers in right here. There's 50,000 people living in Greenland. Greenland is the size of 25% of the total U.S. And the three biggest cities holds 66% of the population. And just the infrastructure in Greenland, just to have the healthcare system, the education system, everything else in place at the same time as you're taking over a lot of more of the regulation stuff like the legals and some of the foreign policies. I think that's a big thing to do with a short with a population of this size.
Okay, so for right now, you feel Greenland does still need Denmark, can move toward independence. The Danish people don't necessarily have a problem with that, but for right now, Denmark still needs to be in the equation. But Amy, President Trump has said very clearly that he's going to get Greenland. But how does he do that? How does he envision getting it? What are really the options since he only has 4 years in office?
Right. What the president has been doing is reestablishing total dominance in the Western Hemisphere, from renaming the Gulf of America to kicking the Chinese out of the Panama Canal, negotiating with Colombia, tariffs focused mostly on Canada and Mexico, and Greenland, which is a strategic and potential really strong trading partner. And when I think, I believe, when he's talking about getting Greenland, is what he means is shoring up a stronger trading partner with the 12th largest country that's a very close neighbor. And I think he has a great interest in doing that, not just for American strength, but to sort of ward off Chinese or Russian encroachment.
Okay, but you're saying, you're describing a trading partnership, which anyone is entitled to have with the U.S. He says, we will have Greenland.
Well, he also said we were going to take back the Panama Canal. That's not, it's often about leverage. And frankly, him drawing this attention has given a great deal of leverage to the folks of Greenland in their bid for independence from Denmark.
Okay, let me ask Tom about that then. I mean, how skilled should Greenland be then in leveraging what it has to, I guess, both attain independence and then build a profitable non-colonial relationship with the United States?
It depends what exactly they want. And I think one of the lessons from previous moments where countries look like they've become independent is actually very unpredictable. It can go in lots of different directions. So one direction that's possible, which Amy's playing down, I think, reasonably, which Trump's rhetoric might suggest, is Greenland becoming a US federal territory. Now, one of the advantages of that might be, particularly if the US paid Greenlanders money, they could then pay for the welfare system they have there, they have already, which Greenland can't currently support. And by being integrated into the US market, Greenland's natural resources could be exploited in a more effective way, a bit like Alaska is, relatively near Greenland, as far as anything's near Greenland. So that's one possible model. Another model might be Greenland became independent with a very close link with the US, which might, I think would go beyond the trading deal, go beyond the military deal, but also include the full rights to the US to use the natural resources on the same terms as Greenland as citizens, and also military protection. So there's lots of different frameworks that could happen. But I think what would be very important for shaping it is a clear consensus in Greenland. And obviously, I understand because they've got an election going on, they can't be there. My impression is that's very up in the air in Greenland. At the moment, large majority say they don't want to be part of the US. Majority say they want independence, but they don't want to be that if that cuts their welfare state. So I think Greenland's a very important player in this. What I do think is true now is that there's going to be wariness of a fully independent Greenland without close ties to the US, partly in the context of growing Chinese power. But I would emphasize there's no way the US is going to invade Greenland, even if Trump wanted to. There's just far too much opposition in Congress to do that effectively. And I kind of agree with Amy. I don't think he actually wants to do that.
Okay. Let me ask.
Can I comment
go
on
ahead,
that?
Bo.
I think this is, we talk about this military thing, and I really don't understand why that's up in the air, because the treatment from 1945 with NATO, it gives U.S. all the rights to have bases in Greenland and do all the defense they want up there. But apparently they're basically just maintaining one single base. So I don't get where that comes from, because they have all the rights. It's documented, and they can do whatever more or less they want military in Greenland. So I don't see why that's up in the air again in the U.S. I think it must be because lack of knowledge about these treatments that's already in place.
Explain this lack of knowledge. What is it that they're missing?
I think they're missing, that we talk about protecting Greenland military. They can already do that. They don't need to let's say, I agree that, I agree with a lot of the things that's said already, but in general terms, protecting Greenland has been up in the air since 1945. And they already have all the access they want in Greenland, if that's the military thing for the U.S. The financial part, we can all discuss what's right and wrong here. I think Greenland have already burned their fingers a couple of times on mining, where they actually have got quite a bit of debt out of the first couple of projects they've done up there. It's extremely difficult to mine in Greenland, and it's extremely expensive.
Okay. I mean, there's mining, there's the rare earth minerals, of course, but there's also the geopolitical and strategic importance of its location. So, Amy, President Trump says Greenland is important for international security as well as national security. But why? I mean, is he admitting in a sense here that Russia is a threat? He's fine to say that China is, and China has had some military action or maneuvers in the area. But is this kind of an admission that the U.S. does need to be more careful with Russia in the Arctic?
Well, obviously that they do. And again, I really think it's about reestablishing dominance over the Western Hemisphere. It's not just on Greenland. It's the entire Western Hemisphere that they've got a plan for. And it's not really militarily, we do have control. It's about the shipping lanes. It's about the potential resources. And frankly, again, it's just sort of like, this is our backyard. One of the strategic advantages the U.S. has always had are the big oceans that have to be crossed. And maintaining sort of that those demarcations of power are incredibly important. And in the past few years, we've seen a waning of that and an encroachment by the Chinese, certainly, but also the Russians.
Okay. Tom, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, I'm sorry, we're being a horribly consensual panel. I agree with almost everything said by the other speakers. But what I would say is it is worth, insofar as the Arctic starts melting, that might mean it's more strategically contested by Russia or China, as you rightly say. Secondly, I completely agree. I think there's a tendency at the moment for the US, as Amy was saying, to emphasize more the Western Hemisphere. They might want to expand their bases, which is perfectly okay at the current point. But it's also worth remembering it's actually an important part of the story, because countries have left NATO countries before and not stayed in NATO. So that's done mostly at the moment through instruments of NATO and agreements with Denmark. Now, I strongly suspect, and I think that's all the indications from the Greenland independence forces are they do this, there would be a new deal that will replace that on very similar terms. But, that won't happen automatically. You could imagine a scenario where it didn't happen. So I don't think one could just assume the existing strategic relationship would continue. I think actually there's a good chance it might deepen and strengthen. But there isn't, you leave a country becoming independent, even in a series of steps, it's a big thing. and that could potentially upend. I'd also say on the mining, I do think, and I strongly suspect, to be honest, President Trump has a grossly exaggerated view of how valuable these resources would be, at least in anything but the very long term. But at the same time, there have been massive improvements in recent years in attempts to mine. And part of the tension with Greenland has been it's harder for them to exploit their natural resources because of the kind of environmental consensus in Denmark. You're very similar things in the US. So in Alaska, they often want to exploit their resources more than the United States would let them. So you can imagine an independent Greenland in some kind of alliance with the US might increase natural resource extraction, though I totally agree one should exaggerate how quickly that would be or how unambiguously beneficial that would be.
Okay, Bo, let me ask you, since President Trump does seem to see a lot of what he does in terms of business and how he would run a business, I mean, would it be possible for the U.S. to, in a business sense, almost stage some sort of hostile takeover of Greenland? For example, you know, there are only 57,000 people. If they offered a large sum of money to each citizen to just take U.S. citizenship instead, and plus, you know, parts in certain mineral deals, a more secure future sold as, you know, a package to the Greenlanders as individuals, what would take place then? Could it be possible for that to happen? And then what would the EU do?
Let's take it in one, two steps here. There is, I mean, if a hostile takeover would take place, that would be, you know, also breaking the democracy of Denmark. There is a treatment between the Danish Commonwealth, which includes Greenland. There's they have a deal of that was made in 2009. Where they can actually, there's an Article 21 they can kind of raise, and if that happens, it will go to the Danish Parliament to vote for more independence or not. My guess, and this is my personal guess, will be they will probably leave it to the Danish population as you know, put it out for vote if we should do that. Democratically, they are part of Denmark until that vote is done. That is by law.
Okay, but I mean, could they fast track that process if there's an offer on the table? I mean, Amy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I mean,
can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Because yeah. I think that's really important here. No, they can't. I mean, they can fast track it by activating Article 21 and then ask the Parliament to make a decision. And if the Parliament makes a decision that they can go ahead, then there's a lot of tides that needs to be loosened up. Or the Parliament can choose to make it a public voting on that matter here in Denmark. That's how the democracy works. We can't just cross-pass democracy.
Fair enough, but we have seen some processes take place that did surprise a lot of the global public. I'm thinking of Brexit. I mean, yes, it did take years, but in the scale of the time since Brexit was first mentioned, for example, when people thought it was completely on the margins, to the time where it actually did become a reality, is short in hindsight. So, I mean, Amy, would you see, because again, President Trump, Amy, only has, 4 years in office, and he says he wants to get this done. He seems to be thinking it doesn't have to be a complicated transaction. So would you envision this kind of expedited somehow?
Yeah, I think so. What we haven't really mentioned here is the 57,000 people that live in Greenland, largely indigenous Inuit, who get to decide their own future. And I think that in America, and I think in Denmark, there's sort of loath to fully step in and influence that process. If they decide to go independent, and if that is potentially spurred by a U.S. partnership, the U.S. would be, excited about that, happy about that. But ultimately, we don't control that, and we don't control the timeline. But certainly, the president and this administration is going to make a strong push for Greenland to come on over.
Yeah, because Tom, I mean, we've heard Greenlanders complain a lot. I mean, this is part of the reason the independence issue is so popular. They've complained a lot about what they see as Danish exploitation of Greenland. But are they prepared for what could fill the void if they do push for independence more quickly than what Bo is describing?
I mean, as I think I was kind of saying, that process could potentially be very quick. I mean, I think, as is often the case with these things, I think the existence of an independent parliament. You've had similar interactions in the UK, where we've had an independent parliament in Scotland, and Scottish independence has gone from being a completely fringe issue in UK politics to within 10 points of winning a referendum. So I think that's actually a lot of the dynamic. The worst exploitation, so things like banning Greenland trading with the rest of the world, except through Denmark, massive attempts to illegally put contraception in Inuit, actually happened decades ago. Like, it's a much the push to independence has come in a period where Denmark's actually been more of a peace loving. One thing I'd emphasize, which is a slightly different dynamic, is I think it's important the Danish feelings to be respected here, including from American national interest. There's been a lot of short-term agitation, but Denmark is historically probably the most pro-American Western country. For example, in the Iraq War, it was probably even more pro than Britain, possibly more pro than the US itself. And if the US wanted to purchase Greenland, which I think, I'm not convinced it's going to happen, not least because I'm not convinced Congress is interested and they'd have to pay for it. One thing I suspect that should be done to make it work would be to pay Denmark, which actually might be quite an attractive offer for the Danish citizens. And that, of course, is over 100 years ago, while Alaska's part of the United States, they bought it off Russia. So I think it's important for the US to take account of the sensibilities of Denmark, who are feeling, I think, as a whole, quite hurt and agitated by some of the language that's been used. And there's no particular reason, given that Denmark doesn't strongly object to Greenland independence, why either a closer tie with the US or even Greenland taken over by the US couldn't be done in a way that respects and pleases the people of Denmark. And I think that's actually quite important, not least for the signal it sends to other US allies, whether Western Europe, whether in Israel and beyond.
Okay, Bo, can I assume you agree there that at least the US should do a better job of taking Danish interests and...
Yeah, but I don't like we talk about Greenland as kind of an object we can sell. It was part of the treatment between U.S. and Denmark in 1917 when Denmark actually and the U.S. made a deal on the U.S. Virgin Island, and the U.S. gave Denmark Greenland instead. I think that was 100 years ago. We can't deal with countries that way anymore. This is not about money, and the Danes would not be happy about having money for Greenland. This is, I think, actually, it's downgrading Greenland to being an object of sale, which I don't think it is. I was there a week ago. I hear completely different stories what I hear you guys talking about here. I hear them talk about all the other things. This is not about independence alone from Denmark or the U.S. This is about how should Greenland develop. That's what really interests the Greenland people.
And that's exactly what Trump would argue he has in mind. Maybe not even too dissimilar to what we've seen in his plans for Gaza. He has a development plan that he believes the Greenlanders are going to love. He believes it's pragmatic. It may be transactional. You say Greenland is not for sale, but he wouldn't see this so much as a sale as this is just a pragmatic transaction.
But that's not how it should be. I mean, we're living in a democratic world, and we can't deal with people that way. It flashes back times in the 30s for some of the stories we hear. Some of them even go a couple of 100 years back when we treated people as well. I don't really believe in this. I'm strongly in favor of. And I think the most Danes are that Greenland get more independent, and they have to do it their own way.
Okay, I mean, Amy, Bo obviously doesn't think that's the right way to do it, but Trump isn't the most traditional politician. So do you see something different unfolding?
I don't see something different unfolding. Actually, I think this is how it's going to go down. I think it's going to be strategic partnership. Trump is certainly not subtle or careful with his words that he uses, and I don't defend that. But I do think that there's a deal and a partnership to be made here, both with our allies in Denmark and with Greenland. I would expect that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to be spending a great deal of time in discussions. If I were Denmark and Greenland, I would be reaching out and making overtures as well to him. And I think that this is how Trump gets a deal. He goes very hard into the paint and makes kind of outlandish statements, and then he cuts a deal.
Okay, Tom, I can give you just under a minute for your final thoughts.
So I think I largely agree actually with both the other speakers. I would emphasise the sensibilities of all three countries here matter, and I'd also just emphasise, even though I think Amy's suggestion or something resembling it is probably the most likely, and that might well include Greenland and part of Denmark, just a high uncertainty here. That movements for independence can move in odd directions and can end up, and so I think there's actually quite a high degree of uncertainty from the status quo being part of the US. I just think there are quite a lot of options that could happen, even if lots of them aren't very likely.
Okay, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, and thanks to our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.